Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy to welcome you today to this Church Administration, Admin and Ops podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes, and our special guest today is Ray Evans. Thank you so much for joining us and coming on the podcast.
No, thank you for the privilege of being here. Thank you, Gavin, very much.
It's great. Now, Ray and I connected at the FIEC offices probably a couple of years ago. And, you meet somebody and you go, wow, this guy is something. And we sort of we think the same, when we were talking about leadership and we were talking about churches behind the scenes, it was like, oh yeah, Ray's definitely got a feature on this podcast. And so you're the FIEC leadership consultant. That sounds very posh, Ray.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to call me. And they plucked this name out of nowhere. And it's somewhat hung around my neck, I'm afraid. But but I just try and give advice and guidance and support to leaders and their teams all around the country, which is a real joy and privilege for me. Yeah.
And very effective. Now, Ray, you've been in pastoral ministry for a long time, haven't you? You've served Grace Community Church in Bedford, wasn't it, for over 40 years? You've retired from there. Tell us a little bit about your sort of background into ministry.
Yeah, so I was traveling to Bedford to see my fiance. And I went to her church, which was this church, and I kind of stuck. I was doing research at the time. I was doing a PhD over at Cambridge, and then we got married, and I finished my research. Jenny was a nurse, so we neither of us had a job. and a baby on the way, and then we got evicted from the house, which was a nurse's house. So that was an interesting start to marriage. And I became a window cleaner. I thought, while I'm waiting to get something else, I clean windows. So I had around for about 500 houses, and I thought I'd do that for about a couple of months. But 2 years later, still window cleaning. But in the kindness of God, he was leading me into ministry. I was asked, would I do a kids talk? And then a midweek Bible study. Eventually, would I do a talk on a Sunday? The church was very supportive of me, and eventually said, would I train for Christian ministry? And so I did, and I joined the staff team here in 1982. There was just two of us, the senior pastor and me. And almost within 3 months, he said, right, I'm leaving, Ray. I'm going to go and we're going to plant a church. I'm leaving. And over to you. So I've been in ministry about 6 months.
And you're already leading.
But hey,
wow,
it was all right. And the kindness of God. The church then it started in 1972 with just 12. Okay. It grown to a congregation. I guess when I took over, it was probably about 60 adults, 15, 20 kids maybe. Yeah. We'd sent 30 odd people away to plant this church 4 or 5 miles the other side of Bedford. So it was quite fragile, quite small. I was on my own, and then as the church grew, each time we got another full-time worker, we planted a church. So we got involved in several church plants, church revitalizing over the years. Yeah, and then gradually, in the late mid-90s, I suppose, the church began to grow, and then we started growing what you might call a church staff team. About 2002, we started employing not just me. There was others involved, and eventually, when I left, retired. I still go to the church. There's a great staff team leading it now. I suppose when I left, the church grown somewhere between 500 and 600 people, with a staff team of 16 full and part timers. So we'd gone through those various sort of growth barriers, if you like, from small to medium to awkward. And then I think we would call ourselves a small large church now, about between 500 and 600 people come on a reasonably regular basis. So
brilliant. And you're married and you've got 4 kids now.
We have 4
all grown up, I assume.
All grown up, 2 boys, 2 girls, and we have 10 grandchildren.
Oh wow.
5 boys, 5 girls. We did our first grandson, Sam. He very sadly he was born with a major heart defect. Okay. And he died just after 4 days. So we've had 11.
Okay.
but we've got 10 at the moment, and yeah, and they all live locally. We see a lot of them, which is brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
That's
Yeah.
lovely. That's wonderful. And you started talking about the kind of small church, medium, awkward, and large. And I just want to kind of feature on this. Somebody gave me your book, Ready, Steady, Grow. They said to me, "This is a brilliant book. You need to get hold of this and read this, Gav," which I've done. And I love the kind of where your experience shows. You know, you've grown from 60 to 600. Lots of churches kind of go through those different levels, and we often speak to churches and say, what does administrative support look like at 50, 100, 150? So we've already sort of engaged in that. Tell us a little bit about kind of that awkward definition. So you've got the small, the medium, and then you've got this awkward size.
Yeah.
How did you come to that?
Yeah. So the hard way, I suppose, what happened was as the church started small, it grew to sort of medium, and then we planted. So it kind of went back to
Yeah,
large, small, if you like, 60 people, grew up again. Then we planted another church. So for quite a long time, you're benefiting from the very positive size dynamics of around 100 people.
yeah,
If you're only 25, you're worried one family moves away and oh crumbs,
yeah.
But when you get to about 100 people attending, you kind of feel safe.
Hmm.
Somebody can move away and that be okay because other people are moving in, and the relationships, kind of the core people know everybody. They've got capacity to know the new people coming. The new people feel, oh, it's really welcoming. I really like this. They get to know people in a reasonable amount of time. They don't give
Yeah,
up on that, and they know it's take a little while. And perhaps more significantly, a hardworking church leader he'll be able to cope with that. Um, he'll know everybody. He'll know all the new babies' names. He'll know where people have gone off to uni, perhaps even what courses they're doing. He will have married, taken some of the
yeah,
marriages back. So it's very relationally strong at around 100 people.
yeah.
And many churches, their average size of an FIEC church in Britain is around 76. So,
Okay.
and even in the United States, that kind of medium-sized church is very common,
Yeah,
and it's lovely. It's very relationally warm. But if you keep growing, what begins to happen around 150, and there is a number, it's called the Dunbar numbers.
yeah.
Bloke
Yeah,
called British social anthropologist reckons that around 150 ancient tribes sort of started limiting themselves because they didn't know who foe or friend was. Now
yeah.
look, whether that adds
Yeah.
up or not, but the point is around 150, several things begin to happen. Core people feel like they're failing by not getting to know all the new people,
Hmm. Yeah,
and the new people don't even try to get to know everybody. They think, oh, it's a
yeah,
receding target.
yeah,
And then the pastor begins to know, the church worker will know, he's spinning many, many plates, and it won't take much for some of these to come crashing down. And when you go from 50 to 100, everybody cheers, thinks it's
yeah,
great. God is blessing the church. You go from 100 to 150,
yeah,
people wonder why their lovely church is not so friendly anymore.
yeah,
And you go into a time when you if you don't know what's happening, you think, well, I'll work harder, I'll work faster, I'll do more. And the
yeah,
core people need to be more committed, and we'll try and get all these new people on board, and they're not interested. And so you end up around 150. Now, numbers aren't exact. You could perhaps grow up
yeah,
to nearly 200, but it will happen sooner or
yeah,
later.
yeah,
A lot of relational stress and strain, unless you understand what's happening and you do something about it. Now, we had grown to that sort of number, and partly because I was more experienced. I was doing my sermons faster, but without diminishing their,
yeah,
you know, well, diminishing their quality, such as it
yeah,
was. But you're more experienced pastorally, so you feel you're coping for a while.
yeah,
But and others begin to realize it doesn't take much, and something could, a crisis here, a sudden death there, and it would all be really stressful. And then, amazingly, I went to a seminar in a place near here, I knew a bloke who was doing a talk, and I just went along, and he talked about church size dynamics. Well, I never even heard of church size dynamics.
Yeah.
And he just put his finger on this problem of being awkward sized.
Yeah.
And it just resonated. I thought that's exactly where we are. It's exactly what's happening to me and our core members and our fringe members. So we began to just discuss it.
Yeah.
And we had plateaued as a church. We were in a hall, it was 80% full. We were trying our hardest to sort of see more people become Christians. But, you know, we plateaued for 4 or 5 years. You could see the graph, if you like. And we didn't know what was, yeah, it was okay, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
And this really helped us understand what was happening to us and then what we could do about it.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
and we realized there is a glass ceiling.
Yeah.
That no matter how hard an individual works, how hard the core work, unless you kind of re-engineer the way you do church around small groups, you invest in small groups, you invest in people doing different jobs from the senior leader, then you will just you can get stuck. And so many churches don't, because they don't know what's happening to themselves, they don't, and it doesn't feel great. And there's a real mindset change.
Yeah.
From a church of 100 where you go, right, I know who's here today, I know who's missing.
Yeah.
To a church where you don't know who's here. There are loads of people in the room, you don't know them. Instead of seeing that as a negative, you go, isn't it fantastic? God is bringing new people, people bringing their friends, new people are getting converted. I am excited to be in a church where I don't know everybody who's here. Whereas that's almost an anathema to a church of 75. If you don't know who's there, what's wrong with you? In a church of 500, you'll never know all who's there, because there are probably 20 new people have turned up this morning. So that for many people, that's a very, it makes them feel very, very uneasy. And for some, they might begin to say, well, you know, how can we be the body of Christ if we don't know who's here? And for some, they'll use a sort of theological, surely if, you know, if one weeps, we all should weep. If one rejoices, how can that happen in a big crowd where you don't know everybody? And you go, well, don't push the biblical metaphor too far. When Paul wrote some of that material, he's writing to large churches. Rome, for example, it's a large church, perhaps multiple congregations. We don't know exactly. Corinth, the Lord Jesus said, there are many people. I mean, he can't have meant just 15 or 20, can he? There are many people, clearly quite a large church. But Ephesus, when Paul calls for the elders, and he's not just talking to 3 blokes when he says from some among your own number, as he wags his finger. He can't have been just talking to a few. So clearly those body metaphors and those, you know, working together metaphor could be applied to a large group of people as well as a small group of people. So I think the lesson is there is no ideal size of church. What you have to cope with is what are you having to cope with yourself? And every size will bring its pluses and its minuses. Even the medium-sized church, the big problem with the medium-sized church, which is relationally lovely, is time. If you stay like that for 20 years, everybody's 20 years older. And then gradually what you find, the church will feel like late middle-aged. And so your numbers are fine, still only 100 of you, you know, because you've lost a few, you've gained a few, but you've stayed around 75 to 100. But if you stay like that for 20 to 30 years, you're gradually going into decline. It's inevitable. The majority of people become in their 50s. No more children are going to be born, you know, and that happens earlier than people realize. Many people, you know, begin to finish their families in their late 30s, early 40s. And although it may feel like you've got children around, actually the numbers of people going to have babies is almost now zero. So gradually now it's only a matter of time. Those kids will grow and leave. The church will become late 50s, then 60s, 70s, and then it'll decline. And so even if you're in a church which is a numbers is fine, time's the killer. So sooner or later you have to face some of these challenges of whatever stage and size you are. And for us, the awkward size meant some real big changes to the way we do church and the way we feel about church.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think your 3 points there on the mindset, leaders, capabilities or capacity, and then the third one that you identify is the kind of organizing tasks things, which changes. And I often meet a lot of leaders in that kind of awkward size where they feel, Ray, like a failure because they aren't able to manage the church in the way that they've been managing it. And often I find leaders who either duck out of ministry at that point because they think, I'm not able to do what I did when the church was a small or small medium, you know. So
Yeah.
you come across that a lot, I guess.
Yeah, I do. So I think it significantly in leadership training, pastor training, if you say, have you had any advice lectures
Mm,
talked about empowering other people? And they look at you
yeah,
completely blank.
yeah,
So look, like if you delegate is it's a good word, but it's not a good word. The trouble with the word delegate, it tends to have that feeling of this is a rubbish task. Will you do it for me?
yeah. You
Because I've
pass it
got
on.
more important things to do. And you
Yeah,
can read that back into Acts 6 if you're not very careful. Um,
yeah,
we shouldn't wait on tables. We should be preaching the gospel. You know, you think it's like a
yeah,
no-brainer,
yeah,
but actually, you can then look at that as if there's somehow that task is irrelevant. No, no, their mindset is one of empowering.
yeah,
That the widows have to be fed. If we don't feed the widows, we deny the faith. It's really significant
yeah,
task. We need some really good people, and we will empower them so
yeah,
that as an organization, we both feed widows and we bring the word. And we need to learn how to empower other people. And many leaders have had no training in how to empower other people, how to support them. They don't understand that when you have people who you're empowering, your job is to make sure they succeed. So you
yeah,
invest in them so they succeed in the task they're doing.
yeah,
And that is part of your leadership job. It's not like, oh, do I have to do this? So many pastors go, look, I really hate all this stuff. I just want to leave me alone in the study with books and sermons.
yeah,
But you don't realize, no, no, if you empower other people
yeah,
well, you will then have the time to
yeah,
do the things that God has especially gifted you for, the books and the sermons. But if you try and get rid of those things and see them as irrelevant, if you're trained, if you know how to help people, empower them in, groups. In fact, I think a lot of church pastors need to understand that their primary role will be working with small groups of people
hmm,
in teams of all kinds, elders, deacons, staff,
yeah,
small teams, and that's your primary job. And you do that well so that you get to preach the gospel
yeah,
in all kinds of circumstances. But your most of your working life will be spent in small groups of people and giving them your very best.
yeah,
Then you find the whole church is energized. It's a classic. You and I have discussed this.
yeah,
What an insight when Jethro said to Moses,
yeah,
Moses, it's no good just you working harder. You're going to do yourself in, and the people are going
yeah,
to be just frustrated. Moses, you need leaders of tens,
yeah,
leaders of 50s, leaders of hundreds. Now, I had spent virtually no time investing in leaders of tens. I didn't realize how important it was. And once we cracked that, we got our church organized around small groups, both for prayer and Bible study, but also for tasks.
yeah,
And I invested in leaders of those teams and helped them understand how to run teams well.
yeah,
Wow, the church absolutely took off.
yeah,
If I show you the graph, we moved a building, so we had more capacity, but we had also re-engineered, and the church probably went from, I don't know, 170 to 350 in 3 years. We
yeah,
added a couple hundred people,
yeah,
and it didn't stress us because we got the structure, if you like, the architecture right.
yeah, yeah,
Lots and lots of small group leaders. We got people into small groups really quickly. I was spending a lot of my time helping those small groups work well with their leaders, and eventually, when then we staffed. Um, we have a guy in charge of our small groups. We have another guy supporting all our task leaders.
yeah,
And then you realize my job is to support the blokes and the women who support all the teams.
yeah,
so that, if you like, instead of a kind of top down, I give orders, we flip it up the other way. I support these 4 people who support all these teams and their leaders.
Yeah.
So that everybody's properly empowered and supported, so that I suppose in the church now we probably have 30 home groups and 45 or 50 teams.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our mantra is nobody in too much, everybody in something.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're involved with like the children's work, you've got to trust that others are involved supporting, old people, or keeping in touch with the elderly and the sick. One of our teams called Kites, keeping in touch with the elderly and sick. And you don't have to be in everything. You can't be.
Yeah.
The ones you are involved in, and many leaders have had no help in how to set teams up, how to run good teams.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Identifying gifting and releasing gifting is crucial, isn't it, in leadership, and that's the bit I think that where there does seem to be a lack of, or a disconnect of training, a disconnect of ideas of how to do that and support of how to do that. I appreciate one FIC church that I was I'd been doing some training with their church administrator that they'd appointed, and it was lovely to hear that they'd been on a 2-year journey in this awkward sized church that had got to a point where they were like, we can't keep going like this. And I think the elders went away on the retreat and they mapped out, and I think the whole thing around organizing task, which helped with communication, which helped with that sense of belonging and participating in church. It was really refreshing to see how they'd gone through that process and where they got to on the other side. And now watching and seeing them, it's like, oh, now they're growing. And and we can see these, if you get some of these ingredients right, you do see that flourish. Ray, what advice would you give to somebody listening to the podcast who thinks, I feel a bit of a failure, I'm in that kind of awkward church size? Where do they start first? Where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, isn't it exciting to be in a church where you're facing some of these challenges? I mean, you'll know around the country, many churches are facing terminal decline.
Yeah,
you're actually living. It's a bit like, you'll know this. A lot of the books on church planting are great, but they tend to describe the sort of first 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Which is okay because it's quite vulnerable during that time.
Yeah.
But actually, it's a bit like having kids. Once, I mean, we have 4. Once you've got a couple, each additional child goes, okay, yeah, we've got babies and nappies, and we've got temper tantrums, and we know we've got sort of bedtime sorted. But what I want to know is what happens when they're 13 or 14 or 15, when hormones kick in, And it's a bit like that with church. Actually, some of the biggest challenges is not in those vulnerable. It has its moments, but when the church is 15 to 20 years down track, what's its vision, and how are we going to facilitate that? If the church has grown, it's grown into this awkward size, a bit like we had 4 teenagers at one time, and it was, it's challenging, and that is the awkward size church. And instead of saying, oh no, woe is me, I'll go and do something else, say, look, if you understand what's going on and you stick in there, your 4 hormonal teenagers will turn into wonderful adults who you have great fun with in a few years' time. You've got to hang on in there. So don't see it as a curse. See it as, right, okay, here's a new challenge. What can I do? And I think you take some lessons from Moses, take some lessons from Acts chapter 6.
Yeah.
Learn to step back a bit and think, okay, who could I empower? Who could I train? Who could I invest in at leadership level? Because what happens, you're fighting pastoral fires, and you've got so many sermons to get ready, you think, I haven't got any capacity to do anything.
Yeah.
One of the best things we did was I wrote down everything I did, and I realized that something like a third of what I was doing was in effect bureaucracy, admin type work, planning rotas, producing material, playing with the new fonts that were coming out on the computers of those days. And I realized, actually, if I had some, and I had some admin support, but it was volunteer.
Yeah.
And you don't like putting on to volunteer, late on a Saturday night, the Xerox machine's broken down.
Yeah.
It's my problem. But I realized that actually we need to pay some staff here to honor somebody and we appointed a 2-day-a-week admin worker. That was one of the best things we ever did, because it cleared my desk of a day. At least I got a day back.
Yeah.
Because this admin worker, and what was good about the admin worker, and I think we've always talked about this with the staff, is the staff don't do the work for the church. They help the church do the work. So
Absolutely right.
the admin workers started getting other people into an admin team.
Yeah.
So like, and what was lovely, for example, copying and pasting and stapling. An 80-year-old couple said, we'd love to be involved doing that. We can't do much up, but we'll do all that. And they started using people that you might not think you would use. So all of a sudden, more people are involved.
Yeah.
And it got me at least a day and a half back, in which I realized, rather than just do more pastoral visits, I needed to invest in leaders of small groups, leaders of teams. I started reading up on how can teams work better. That's where I'd say I'd start. You kind of re-engineer around teams. And in terms of your sermons, you can preach into this, not necessarily directly, but you can create this desire. Wouldn't it be wonderful if every one of us saw somebody that we love saved? We kind of float the boats by devoting ourselves to prayer. And in Colossians 4, where that appears, the context is one of outsiders. And I said, look, folks, don't we see more people saved? And if every one of us had a friend saved, wouldn't that be great? And what would that mean? And people going like, well, we'd have to organize ourselves better. And it helped realize it. So you don't have to hit it. I know I made a mistake. We had a hot, if we can call it, a hot core. People have been in the church a long time, really working hard, getting stressed, feeling failures. A big fringe of people who are enjoying coming to the church. And that's one of the sort of bifurcations you get. You have a hot core and a growing fringe. And that's why you feel a failure.
Yeah.
And at that point, we said, actually, we need to say to the core, you don't need to be involved in everything.
Yeah.
You've got to trust others are doing things. You don't need to know all that's going on. You don't need to be in every team. We came up with this little phrase, nobody in too much, everybody in something.
Yeah.
And we said to our fringe people, look, we'd love you to be involved in a team. Here are the different teams we run. What would you like to be involved in? And interestingly, the fringe wasn't not involved because they were lazy. They just thought all the bases were being covered by really capable people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so by developing our if you like, re-engineering around task groups and home groups, and I spent a lot of time with those leaders, all of a sudden church began to work a lot better. And so I would say to a person who's like, oh, I feel a failure. No, you're not a failure. God is blessing you. It's a bit like, having teenagers. You've now got to readjust. You've got, they're growing. Then, they'll have all kinds of things going on. Your bank balance will feel as if it's going to break every single month. But hang on in there.
Yeah.
And what a privilege to have teenagers. And, the joy of seeing them soon become independent adults. And, I remember one lady saying that if you despair of your teenagers, you don't judge anything till they're 25 or maybe even 30, she said. As she said, 2 of mine took till they were 30, and then all of a sudden they turned out wonderful. So you have to say that to church leaders, that you're not a failure. And that idea that, oh, I wasn't called to this kind of management stuff. Say, look, it's not, this is how you care for people.
Yeah, this is leadership, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It's not.
One guy, he's very helpful like this. He said, you look at this is how you love people.
Yeah,
you love them by helping them get into a small group where they can meet people who they can pray for and they can be prayed for.
Yeah.
You love people by helping them to get into a team where they feel they can serve God effectively, both on a Sunday, during the week. You love people by connecting them with some people who support them in their front line. This is not about management in that kind of bureaucratic sense. It is about how we love and care for people.
Yeah.
And
Right.
actually, you know, a long time ago, one person said this. He said, D.L. Moody, I think it was. He said, I'd rather train 10 people than do the work of 10 people.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah,
and once you get that,
yeah.
you go, this is how
Absolutely right.
you multiply.
Yeah,
You invest in others. And in the kindness of God, you find as you do that, you do. One pastor put it like this. He said, I oversee everything so that I make sure that I'm ready to preach to the whole church on Sundays.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I used to resent having to oversee everything, but he said, now I realize that because I oversee it, I can get to preach on a Sunday.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely right.
And
Yeah,
and so it's not that
yeah,
you do less, it's that
yeah,
it changes, and so you don't become the only person people go to be a pastor.
yeah,
And that for some people, that's quite a challenge to say, look, you have to diminish that others may grow.
yeah,
We use a little phrase here. You either keep power and you lose influence, or you give power away and you gain influence, but you can't do both.
yeah,
As
yeah,
you empower other people, you gain, they ask you for advice, they ask you for support. You're less prominent in many ways,
yeah,
but more effective.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'd
That's
probably
helpful,
say.
Ray. Yeah, that's really helpful. I think you picked up some good things here, and one of the messages that we keep saying at the church office is that as you begin to start to recognize that you need some help, don't just think, right, an assistant parter, and that's what I need, but actually how we can think of the administrative side, those
Yeah,
awkward things of organizing more things, better communication, building teams. You can't do that on your own. And so even just having somebody, we've seen churches that have gone from sort of administrators, sort of church managers for sort of 2 or 3 mornings a week, no more than 8 hours a week, and it's dramatically changed not just the church's experience, but the pastor's experience.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and we see that. And so if we can get people away from that default, right, I need some help, I'm going to get an assistant pastor.
yeah,
Let's lose that default and actually
yeah.
think, right, what are my strengths and weaknesses as a leader? Who could we bring in that actually could help us get past this awkward sized church? And I think that's essential, isn't it, Ray?
It is. I mean, absolutely. Our previous model had always been find a capable preacher, raise their finances, send
Yeah,
them to plant another church, then do again. And every time
yeah,
we did that, so our eldership never was more than 2 or 3, because every time we got one, we gave them away. Now that's
yeah,
great, but the danger is you're trained to look for a kind of clone of yourself.
yeah,
So this is the problem with the assistant pastor. Basically, you want somebody who could do your job if you moved, or you'll
yeah.
move him on to. And in a way, there's a lot of wisdom in that, but we mustn't settle for either or.
Yes.
It's a both and what you need is, you're absolutely right, if the church is to grow, you need people who've not like you,
Yeah.
who've not got who
Yeah.
can do things. They don't need a platform, they don't want to be up the front all the time. You need someone who's good with working with small groups of people.
Yeah.
um Obviously godly, spiritually minded. It was interesting in Acts 6, men full of the Holy
Mm.
Spirit.
Yeah.
So
Spirit of
this is
wisdom.
not
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
it's not just a sort of it's not
Someone's really
simplistic.
practical and someone's really, ADHD on these things. It's not that, is it?
No,
It isn't.
it's
Yeah.
godly people. But yeah, and I think I can't tell you how important it was when we started going sort of, as it were, sideways with our and begin to think very clearly how we could empower people very, very different from
Yeah.
our preachers. So our staff team was in the end very diverse. We
Yeah.
had, we ended up with 16 of us, full and part time. We had 8 women workers, 8 men workers. Um, Several of the women were sort of working in the community during the week. Others were doing the kind of admin running
Yeah.
teams, helping the
Yeah.
teams work well. Others were doing women pastoral work. Some of the guys, there were other preachers,
Yeah.
um, but they were also looking after certain areas of church life. One was responsible for all our teams. one was responsible for new people, one was responsible for our small groups, one was responsible for our community outreach. And that diversity of gifting and releasing really has served us. And
It's made a big
that's
difference, isn't it?
massive difference, massive. And it wasn't. I mean, that's the great thing. I often say to church workers, think hard, because people say, well, I haven't got the full-time salary, so you don't need it.
Yeah.
At one time was me. I was me on my own, and we had 4 part-time workers, all doing a day a week.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it didn't cost the church a lot of money. Each new part-time worker didn't cost the church a lot of money, but phenomenally added to our output. And most people who do that, what you're doing with a salary is honoring the fact that this job is more than you'd expect a volunteer to do. People are not doing it for the salary, they're doing it to serve the Lord. But actually the multiplying effect of several part-time, in our case we had several part-time women workers, was absolutely phenomenal. And so we tend to think of pastor, assistant pastor, that's 2 full-time salaries. Whereas in the providence of God, we had me full-time and 4 part-time workers, and the 4 part-time workers didn't even add up to 1 salary. Very, very different from me. Much better working in small groups, much better in outreach. So
that's really helpful.
That's something that kind of is almost counterintuitive. You almost feel like, oh, well, I must have another assistant pastor who can do the same work as I'm doing. And you say, no, you're probably somebody who is doing something very different from you.
Absolutely.
Particularly in this realm behind the scenes in the awkward sized church, it is about investing in small groups, home groups and task teams. And in that sense, you don't want somebody who's going to mimic you, because the gifting's needed. You don't want somebody who's necessarily on the platform at all. Our small guy, our small task team guy, very rarely is on a platform. He's brilliant with small groups. He's a really great, you'd say he's apt to teach. He's an elder in the church. He's apt to teach, but his apt to teachness is in small groups. And even there, his ability to empower other people is what he's brilliant at. It's not so much he's a theologian who likes talking with small numbers of people. It's more he's a godly man who empowers leaders of teams. And that's like gold dust.
Absolutely right. That's so helpful. So if if you're listening to this as a leader or an elder or a trustee, give room to be able to step away from what your current structure is. Find some, so ask some good questions about what do we need going forward. And have the courage, I think, as well, to make some changes and to not just follow the patterns that you may have had for years and years of having a pastor and assistant pastor. Maybe it's time for you to consider breaking the mold and to rethink that. And all that we're talking about here is great from Ray's experience on the other side to the churches that I'm helping who are starting to make some of these changes are already seeing benefits. So if you'd like to find out more, then please write to us at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We would love to interact with you, and if we can serve you and encourage you in any way, then we would love to do that. Ray, I want to move on a little bit towards you've taken something called the 5 voices, and you've really it's landed with teams of elders, it's landed with staff teams. Do you want to take us through a little bit about how you came across this and what you found useful in the 5 voices stuff?
Thanks, Gavin. So a young friend of mine, Tom, who's a pastor in Beccles, Tom Fanning, he did a bit of research when he was a student at college into emotional intelligence, and he did a talk once at a minister's meeting I was at, and I thought, hold on, he's onto something here, and I started reading up on it. And I particularly came across a book by Patrick Lencioni, an American author, called The Ideal Team Player. And he talks about 3 qualities needed in an ideal team player: hungry, humble, smart. Hungry, work hard, do more than you're asked, help your colleagues. Humble, don't need your ego massage, don't need lots and lots of praise, but just getting on with it. The smart was the interesting one. It's not clever, but emotionally intelligent. And he meant by that, and it resonated with what Thomas said, emotional intelligence, I understand myself and I manage myself appropriately, but I understand others who are different from me and I handle them appropriately. Now, he said, if you don't have this quality, and he looks at these three qualities and how they interact, and what if you've got one of them or two of them without all three strong? He said, if you lack emotional intelligence, you leave people feeling a bit used. He used the phrase accidentally diminished. You don't intend to use them, but that's how they feel. And I thought, you know what? This is happening in churches everywhere.
It's very insightful, that, isn't it?
Yeah, leaders leaving people feeling used. And I'm like, oh my goodness, he's onto something here. This is what I'm picking this up all over the place. Leaders who say, what's wrong with these people? You know, that kind of phrase. You're thinking, oh my goodness. Leaders who get cross with people, frustrated with people. And I recognized this thing about emotional intelligence. Many leaders are quite, if you like, intellectually bright, but that doesn't mean you're emotionally intelligent. It doesn't mean you necessarily understand and work with others appropriately. And so I started reading up on this and beginning to realize that actually this is where many teams don't function well. Elderships don't function very well. Elders and deacons, small groups, staff teams, all over the place. Christians get on each other's nerves. So I thought, okay, what can we do? And what's nice about this, so some of the stuff out there, like you think of Belbin, where there's so many roles, you kind of like, it's just hundreds of different, or Myers-Briggs, you get typecast. I sometimes joke, am I going to be a completer finisher in eternity? You know, is that it? I'm stuck. Whereas the thing about Hungry, Humble, Smart, what Lencioni argues is that you can grow in these areas. It's not like you've got it or you've not. You can learn to work harder or to work effectively. You can learn to put your ego to death. You can learn to praise others in the team. You can learn to give glory to God. You can learn how to manage yourself more appropriately and understand others who are different. Then I came across this, the 5 voices. You can find it online. As the two authors, Steve Cockram and Jeremy Kubicek, they wrote a book called 5 Voices. They're kind of riffing off the sort of love language stuff. You know, my wife's a farmer's daughter, and if I give her cut flowers, she says, what a waste of money. If it doesn't grow, she's not interested. Her love language is not cut flowers. You know, so you know, we know that in our, you know, and in some ways marriage is a wonderful, it should grow you in emotional intelligence, shouldn't it? You know, you should understand, right? Okay, when she's crying, she just wants a hug. She doesn't need an explanation, you know. Anyway, so they talk about 5 voices, and again, it's not what we would call scientific analysis. It's just a suggestive insight into how people express themselves. And they use 5 categories, so it's not, you know, it's not too complicated. And they're saying we naturally speak from a particular strength we might have. For example, we might be someone who loves being creative. They have this they talk about the creative type. They talk about the connector who immediately says, oh, I know somebody you need to know, Ray. You know, let me give you their telephone number. You talk about the nurturer. I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. All people-based. You have the guardian, who's a bit like, hold on, can we just check that figure out, please? Is that accurate?
Very protective,
and then the pioneer, the one who, like, you know, where do we want to be in a year's time? And they say, look, everybody's speaking the same language, English in this case, it could be, but they're speaking from a kind of a natural strength, what they call, they use different categories. They say, look, you can do some sort of questionnaires and find out what your strongest voice is. But they would talk about you being aware, and you thinking, oh yeah, I know, I love. If you give me some figures, I just love projecting them on into the future. Pioneer.
Yeah.
And we recognise that actually some of us have got known strengths, but we've also got unknown weaknesses.
Yeah.
And actually, for example, what one guy we talked to, he was unaware that one of his weakest was a guardian. He could come out with quite judgmental comments when he wasn't aware of it.
Yeah.
And so it's not only it's a tool to help me understand myself.
Yeah.
I turned out to be a pioneer nurturer, which is a kind of quite a neat little combination for a senior leader. I want the church to keep growing, but I understand I've got to take people with me. That's the nurturer stuff. We then did it as a team. We sat down. We got everybody in the team to do it on their own, and then we all sat down and we discussed. We went through our scores and what came out as strong and weak at, and all of a sudden the whole room lit up. One lady, Louise, said, how did they know me? How did they know?
Filling in a questionnaire.
Filling a question. How did they know? That's described me to a T. I love connecting people to people. And so what happens is you grow as a team in that what you can all be speaking, but you can be speaking past each other unless you know what one another's heart emphases are. Let me give you an example. I once said to a lady called Tina, we would have been a church of about 200, 250. I said, Tina, wouldn't you love to be in a church of 1,000, which is pioneer? You see a pioneer's eyes light up. But she said, Ray, I'd hate that. That'd be awful. It'd be so impersonal. And then I thought, hold on a minute. I've used the wrong language. And then I realized she's a nurturer. So I said, what if your husband Clive and your daughter Laura and your son Darren become Christians? And she said, I'd love that. I said, Tina, that's all it is. Every one of us having 3 people we love become Christians. She said, Ray, I'd love that. And all of a sudden you realize if you talk in a language that kind of resonates, where someone is, that's me, I'm a nurturer. They argue that something like 60% of people, 60 to 70% of people are heart nurturers. They want to know, are people being cared for? About 10% are connectors, 10% are guardians, 5% are creatives, 5% are pioneers. So it helps this. So if you want the church to think of a vision for the future, you don't put your pioneer on first, because he'll talk about numbers and growth and change. You put on a nurturer who says, won't it be amazing if more people were being cared for? Let me tell you a story about Ethel, who came as a stranger and we welcomed her. And now Ethel serves on our welcome team. And everybody will go, And then the pioneer says, well, what we need to do is raise 500,000 more. And everybody goes, yeah. You see, if you get the wrong order, you put the pioneer on first, everybody's scared witless. So we began to use this as a team, and it helped us understand. And they make the point that in a room, whether it's men or women, these voices have different volumes. A carer will be quite intimidated by a kind of get up and go pioneer. A nurturer will be wanting to bring someone else into the room. A creative will want to go away and think about it and come up with an amazing scheme. A guardian, now there are 2 different kinds of guardians. There are good guardians who, if it's your strength, your guardian voice is, let's think of the unintended consequences. Let's look at the real cost of this. If you're a poor guardian, negativity will run the day, won't it? I've recently, the thing called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I've recently realized I'm a very pessimistic person, really. I'm terrible. It ends on threats, doesn't it? What a terrible place to end, threats. So we stopped using it, because for someone like me, like a guardian, the guardian has the last word. You've been to church members meetings where the last person to speak, has this great scythe of doom, You know, everybody's been excited, and the guardian gets up, and then boom, you know, brings down the cutting axe on them.
Yeah.
So weak guardians, if you need to know your weaknesses as well, if you know you're a weak guardian, that you tend to be negative when you needn't be, you can then begin to change your behavior. Or if you know there's somebody in the room who's a bit like that, you know, you get them on early to get the rubbish out on the table, and everybody else can then deal with it. Whereas if you let someone like that speak at the end, so these 5 voices are relative strengths, relative weaknesses in your tone, the things that excite you, the things that really touch you. And in a sense, you're growing in personal emotional intelligence, but you're also growing in team emotional intelligence. And in a sense, what you want in the room, we have in our staff team, it was lovely. We had a real blend of voices in the room. And the leader, his job, the leader of a team, is to get those voices heard. So too often leaders think a small group is get the people together who I delegate to. Feel like they're my minions. And some churches work they look like they're quite effective, because a powerful leader who has a staff team who he delegates to and gets them to do things for him, in the short run gets a lot done. But in the long run, you lose people. And actually the leaders, that any team leader, whatever size team, whether you're a senior leader or your role is to get the other voices speaking. And you particularly will need to get the nurturers speaking, because they've been naturally a bit quiet.
More timid.
And they'll be worried, and like, it's all very well, Ray, but how's this going to impact our our shut-ins or whatever? And it's really good to get those voices, and you get a range of voices with different strengths and weaknesses. The team begins to function more effectively. And the team leader's job is to notice what voices haven't spoken yet and how to get those voices speaking. And when we did it, we realized we're all speaking the same language, but too often we were not,
just missing each other.
Missing each other, absolutely, speaking past each other. And for a senior leader, it's really helpful to have this kind of emotional insight in the room.
Definitely, because I think there's so much going on there. So understanding yourself, understanding others in the room, being able to delegate stuff effectively as well, because based on passions, based on gifting, I think you find when there is that level of understanding in a team, you feel like decisions are made almost made quicker, because you're able to bring all the different voices on board to say, right, we're going to take the church in this direction. Tell me what you guys think. I want to hear from the nurturer. I want to hear from the creative. I want to hear from all those different voices. And I think it's been. I've seen teams talk about it, and obviously reading some of your articles, Ray, it's made me just realize actually how important this is. And if other people have used personality tests, you're using similar tools that get you to the point. Essentially, is you better understand yourself, those in the room, and how you can work effectively together. It is a really healthy thing. So worth considering looking into this. And it's a very straightforward process, and there's an online self-assessment tool, and you're right. People go, how they don't even know me, but they've described me in a couple of sentences. And it's fascinating, isn't it? These things.
I think again, the thing is, you're not being typecast. In every area you can grow in, and as you understand what you don't realize you're not good at, you begin to think, well, okay, I could become a bit more thoughtful about that. And it gives you an ability to grow. So it's not just you're stuck and that's it. You can grow in these areas. You can begin to be for example, if you're a rabid pioneer, you could begin to understand and think, how might this make people feel how would I speak in a way that helps them the most? Again, if you think of that phrase, the love languages, in marriage, you understand that. I just want you to listen and give me a hug. Or I just want you to help me with the dishes. That would tell me you love me. In marriage, you do it almost instinctively after a period. it's the same. This is how you help love people around you.
Yeah.
Understand, okay, you're expressing your fears, but you're not against the scheme. You're just worried about it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
That's really good of you to share your fears. Whereas too often, some pastors, anybody that raises anything is immediately seen as the negative enemy. And it might not be that. They're just expressing their nurture worry about old people, young people. And once you begin to understand that, it diffuses a lot of the angst and the perhaps even nastiness that sometimes happens when we're not listening carefully. That what somebody's saying is their heart language. And it's great when they feel heard. But they're not necessarily opposed to your ideas. It's just that so that helps a leader, I think. And so everybody can grow. I think that's why I quite like some of this emotional intelligence stuff. Look, the Bible's full of it. The book of Proverbs is full of how to grow in emotional intelligence, isn't it? And it's not a simplistic thing. It's as we develop. And of course, the lovely thing is that great promise in the scriptures: if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask a Father above. And what was once Solomon's privilege in the dream is now every child of God's privilege, any day, every day of the week. Heavenly Father, give me wisdom, give me that. And of course, wisdom is not being super intelligent. Wisdom is, that first of all, that peaceable, full of mercy and good fruit. It's a lovely thing we can ask our Father to grow into. And I think some of these tools just help a team discuss it and understand each other and become more effective as a team. Yeah,
Absolutely. Ray, this is fantastic. Some great stuff on there, mate. Thank you so much for giving us your time and coming on the podcast and talking about these things. If you've heard anything today that you felt, well, this is really encouraging or this is new, then please get in contact. Please let us know. Please encourage us. Please leave a review if you thought, oh yeah, I really have enjoyed the podcast today. We'd love to know more. If you've got any questions that you'd like to follow up with Ray or I, then please get in touch on questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. Please check out the website for online resources, and we'll signpost you to Ray's material and books. And please, hopefully the church office resources are a blessing for you, and we'd love to find out and know if there's any other ways that we can serve you over the next few months. So thanks for listening to the podcast, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.